Hello and welcome back to Dear Jordan. This episode is going to be a little different because I want to talk about something I think the internet has become both incredibly aware of and incredibly confused about at the same time. Trauma. More specifically, how trauma shapes the way we love. Now, before anyone panics, no, this is not me romanticizing suffering. I do not think people should stay in harmful situations. I don't think people being mistreated makes you stronger. And I definitely do not think God designed us to spend our lives emotionally exhausted trying to earn love from people who refuse to give it. But I do think there's a conversation missing when it comes to healing, because somewhere along the way, people started treating every emotional survival trait as something toxic that needs to be erased. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes we do need healing. Sometimes our coping mechanisms hurt us and the people around us. Sometimes our wounds distort the way we connect with others. But sometimes the very things we survived become the reason we know how to love people deeply. Sometimes pain increases compassion. Sometimes grief softens us. Sometimes heartbreak teaches us how to recognize loneliness in other people. And I think that matters because I spent a long time believing my ability to love people came from brokenness. But the older I get and the closer I grow to God, the more I realize that not every wound exists only to be removed. Some wounds teach us how to become safe places for other people. So grab your coffee, your water, your emotional support snack, or whatever is getting you through life right now, and let's talk about it. Dear Jordan, sometimes the world will look at your capacity to love and call it a trauma response. People will look at your willingness to give, to serve, to show up for others, to love deeply, and immediately assume it comes from brokenness. And to be fair, sometimes it does. Sometimes people overextend themselves because they are trying to earn the love they never received. Sometimes they overgive because somewhere along the line they learned that being useful was the closest thing to being valued. And psychology recognizes that. People who grow up emotionally neglected often become hyper-independent, hyper-attentive, or deeply self-sacrificing. Not always because they are healthy, but because survival taught them to anticipate needs before their own were ever met. I understand that language because parts of my life absolutely fit it. I became very self-sufficient, very young. Not because I wanted to be, but because I had to be. By the time I was 7 years old, I was spending large portions of my afternoons alone. And when you spend enough time alone as a child, you start forming conclusions about life before you are emotionally mature enough to understand it. One of the conclusions I formed early was this: love leads to heartbreak. And honestly, I wanted no part of it, because even as a child, relationships already felt fragile to me. Home didn't always feel emotionally safe, and when boundaries between my parents' struggles and my own friendships started blurring, I learned very quickly how vulnerable connection could make you feel. So I pulled inward. I kept my circle small, I kept people at a distance, and for a long time, self-protection felt safer than intimacy. And then your uncle died. And grief changed me. Not overnight, not beautifully, and definitely not in some inspirational movie kind of way. It shattered me first. But somewhere inside that grief, another realization started forming. Life is painfully short. And suddenly, the idea of withholding love felt heavier than the risk of heartbreak itself. So I started loving differently, harder, deeper, more urgently. Almost like I was trying to outrun loss by making sure the people around me never questioned whether they were loved by me. And if I'm being honest, sometimes that became unhealthy. Because there is a difference between loving people deeply and abandoning yourself trying to save them. That distinction took me years to learn. Therapy taught me that some of my overgiving came from wounds, from wanting reassurance, from trying to fill spaces in myself that other people never really had the ability to fill. And that was true. But I also think the modern world has become a little too quick to label every deep act of love as dysfunction, because not every painful experience produces something toxic. Some suffering enlarges your compassion. Some heartbreak increases your ability to recognize loneliness in other people. Some grief softens you instead of hardening you. And I think that matters because if you have experienced deep loss, you often notice pain other people miss. You become gentler with people, more patient, more aware of how badly someone might be hurting behind the version of themselves they showed to the world. That is not always pathology. Sometimes that is wisdom. The Bible talks about this too. In 2 Corinthians, Paul says that God comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others with the comfort we ourselves have received. Not so we become emotionless, not so we become detached, but so suffering itself becomes a bridge between people. And I think that is one of the holiest parts of being human. The ability to look at someone else's pain and say, I know what it feels like to carry something heavy. Not because you studied it, not because you read about it, but because you survived it. Now, does that mean every trauma response should stay untouched? No. Some survival mechanisms absolutely need healing. People pleasing that destroys your sense of self, that needs healing. Accepting abuse because you confuse suffering with love, that needs healing too. But your tenderness, your compassion, your ability to love people sincerely because you understand what it feels like to need love, do not let this world convince you that those things are weaknesses. Just because something was born in pain does not mean God cannot use it for purpose. Sometimes the very wound that hurt you becomes the place where empathy grows. And maybe healing is not becoming harder. Maybe healing is learning how to remain soft without breaking yourself apart in the process. Because the goal was never to stop loving deeply. The goal was to learn that you deserve to receive love deeply too. And that, Jordan, changes everything. I know you constantly hear about me talk about my friend Jerrel, and the reason you hear me talk about him so much is because certain people enter your life at moments where they unknowingly become part of your healing. Jerrel entered my life during a season where I had very little sense of my own worth. I did not think highly of myself, so naturally I didn't expect much from other people either. Everything between us started casually. I honestly don't know what he was looking for at the time, but I definitely was not looking for a relationship. And yet, even in the casualness of it all, he was kind. He was affectionate. He was considerate. But above everything else, he was honest. Painfully honest sometimes. The kind of honest where he would tell me things I absolutely did not want to hear. But honesty was something I had been starving for without even realizing it. I grew up in environments where people were not honest with themselves, with each other, or with me. So over time, dishonesty trained me to distrust everyone. And I mean everyone. I questioned intentions, I questioned words, I questioned kindness, I questioned consistency. Because when trust has been broken enough times, suspicion starts feeling safer than vulnerability. But Jerrel was honest, not perfect. Still, I loved him dearly. But that man was not built for boyfriend life. Yet somehow, as a friend, solid. And to this day, I still do not fully understand how somebody could fail so spectacularly in one category while excelling in another. But as a friend, he showed up consistently. And because he showed up consistently, I slowly began trusting him more than probably anyone else in my life. So when he disappeared from my life during certain periods of time, I felt it deeply. Because the moment trust leaves you after you finally allow yourself to feel safe with someone, your brain immediately wants to retreat back into survival mode. And my survival mode was always the same. Trust nobody, need nobody, live for yourself. But life brought us back into each other's orbit, and eventually we started building something bigger together through business. I remember one conversation specifically where we were discussing something related to work, and he suddenly asked me, "You don't trust me?" And I remember responding, "It's not that I don't trust you, I just don't trust anyone." And he looked at me almost confused and said, "If you don't trust me, why are you in business with me?" And honestly, I didn't have an answer because he was right. Business requires trust. Friendship requires trust. Love requires trust. And if I truly believed nobody was trustworthy, then why was I building something meaningful with another human being? That conversation forced me to confront something about myself. Sometimes unresolved pain disguises itself as wisdom. We convince ourselves we are being careful when really we are just terrified. And Jerrel was hurt by my inability to trust him because truthfully, he had never really given me a reason not to. So from that point forward, I made a decision, not a feeling, a decision. I chose to trust him. And over time, trust became the foundation of our friendship. Not romance, not fantasy, not some fairy tale version of love, just trust, real trust. The kind built slowly through consistency, honesty, presence, and showing up for one another over and over again. And eventually that trust turned into love. Not romantic love, but a deeply human kind of love. The kind where somebody becomes part of your daily life, your emotional safety, your support system, your routines, your future plans. The kind where you know if something goes wrong at 2 a.m., that person is going to answer the phone. And I loved him consistently because I honestly do not think he experienced that kind of unconditional presence very often outside of family. There were many moments where he called because he needed help, and I was there. Moments where life became too heavy, and I was there. Moments where he simply needed someone to listen, and I was there. And I know some people might hear that and immediately think, well, that sounds unhealthy. That sounds codependent. That sounds like overcompensation. But I don't think it was. Was I once broken? Absolutely. But not every act of deep love comes from brokenness. Some of it comes from healing. Some of it comes from finally understanding what it feels like to have someone stay beside you when life gets hard. Because the truth is, Jerrel stayed beside me too. He listened to my fears, my stress, my heartbreak, my battles, my exhaustion. He stayed during seasons where many other people quietly disappeared. And when someone helps you hold your life together during difficult seasons, loving them deeply afterward is not dysfunction. Sometimes it is gratitude. Sometimes it is growth. Sometimes it is the natural response of a healed heart finally recognizing the value of showing up for another human being. And maybe that's what people misunderstand sometimes about love born through hardship. Not all of it is desperation. Some of it is simply the decision to become the kind of person you once needed yourself. And maybe that is one of the hardest truths to accept about life, Jordan. Sometimes God allows us to walk through seasons that stretch us emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. Not because He's trying to destroy our ability to love, but because He is increasing our capacity for it. The Bible never promises us a life untouched by grief. In fact, it says quite the opposite. Romans tells us that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. Not hopelessness, hope. which means pain, when surrendered to God, is not meaningless. It is transformative. And I think sometimes we misunderstand healing because we assume healing means returning to the version of ourselves that existed before the pain. But I do not think God's goal is always restoration to a former self. Sometimes his goal is transformation into someone softer, wiser, more compassionate, more discerning, and more capable of loving people the way Christ loved people. Jesus himself loved with full awareness that people would disappoint him, betray him, deny him, abandon him, misunderstand him, and yet he loved anyway. Not foolishly, not without boundaries, not without truth, but fully. And I think there is something deeply holy about refusing to let this world make you hard after everything you have survived in it. Because the easier route after heartbreak is cynicism. The easier route is isolation. The easier route is convincing yourself that nobody deserves your softness. But healing is not becoming emotionally unavailable so nobody can hurt you ever again. Healing is learning how to love wisely without losing yourself in the process. It is understanding that your worth does not decrease based on someone else's inability to recognize it. It is learning that you can love deeply and still have boundaries. You can be compassionate and still walk away when necessary. You can give love freely without begging for crumbs in return. And maybe most importantly, you can stop seeing your past only as damage. Because some of the very things you survived became the reason you know how to sit with hurting people now. The reason you recognize loneliness, the reason you notice shifts in people's voices, the reason you instinctively reach for people who are quietly carrying too much. Those things were not born solely from brokenness. Some of them were shaped through refinement, and refinement is painful. Gold does not become purified without heat. Faith does not deepen without testing. And love does not mature without sacrifice. That does not mean God wanted every painful thing that happened to us, but I do believe he knows how to use every painful thing for purpose, even grief, even betrayal, even abandonment, even the people we lose, especially the people we lose. So if there is one thing I hope you carry from this letter, it is this. Do not let the world convince you that loving deeply is weakness simply because it was shaped by hardship. Some people become cruel after pain. Some people become closed off. Some people spend the rest of their lives avoiding vulnerability altogether. But others become safe places for hurting people to land. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things a person can become. So protect your heart, yes. Use discernment, have boundaries, learn wisdom, but never confuse healing with becoming cold. Because this world already has enough emotionally unavailable people walking around pretending they are healed simply because nobody can reach them anymore. Stay soft, stay honest, stay loving. Just make sure you remember that you deserve to receive the same kind of love you so naturally give away. And maybe that is what God was trying to teach me all along, that the purpose was never just to survive what broke me, but to become someone capable of loving through it without losing my faith, my compassion, or myself. And that, Jordan, is the kind of healing worth fighting for. I say this with all the love I am still learning how to give. Your mom. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dear Jordan. I think if there's one thing I hope people take away from this conversation, it's that healing is not the absence of tenderness. This world will try very hard to convince you that the safest thing you can become is detached, unbothered, unavailable, untouchable. But I don't actually think that's peace. I think real healing is being able to stay soft without constantly bleeding for everyone around you. I think it's learning how to love with wisdom instead of fear. And I think God has a way of taking the hardest parts of our lives and slowly transforming them into places where compassion can grow instead of bitterness. Not perfectly, not overnight, and definitely not without struggle, but purposefully. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow, share, leave a review, or send it to someone who may need it. And if you like to read more reflections, connect with my coaching work, or explore everything else I'm building, you can find all of that through links in my bio. As always, protect your peace, protect your heart, but do not become so guarded that you forget your ability to love is still one of the most beautiful things about you. This has been Dear Jordan, Letters to My Daughter.